So what I would like to do is give a little bit of the background of how we have come to understand the function of Gibbon song based on my work and the work of many of my team in Indonesia, and then talk through some of the methods that we are using in order to actually obtain these data and how we can then use that to look at Gibbon population density and hopefully then also obtain population numbers. Just to give a bit of an overview about what we're doing in Indonesia is the majority of our work takes place in tropical peatlands. Significant portion of carbon is stored within that, and so it's really important when it comes to tropical biodiversity conservation. And what we notice and what we're seeing across Gibbon landscapes is, of course, degradation and loss of habitat. And it's important to understand how that loss of habitat is impacting Gibbon populations. So we have an expansion, of course, of degraded land. We've got a huge amount of forest loss in Borneo, exploitation for logging and production forest, and a large component of that was cleared for industrial agriculture. So we've also got a massive issue when it comes to dealing with things like conservation. So we're taking a multi-level approach, looking at things like habitat restoration. Ecological research and monitoring is absolutely critical. And this will lead on to the more detailed discussion that I will come on to later about how we actually survey gibbons. Obviously reaching out to local people and looking at habitat protection. So just to give you a bit of background where we are, we're in central Kalimantan in the southern part of Borneo, the Indonesian region. The area we work in is still pretty large, about 5,600 square kilometers. And what we've done with our monitoring of the gibbons is several things we've been able to determine since we started the gibbon work in 2005. So we've been able to map home ranges. This is absolutely critical in terms of monitoring changes, if any, over time. So this is a map of our 6 of our core groups. Some of them have somewhat more interesting names. Some of them are very formulaic. Group C, Group A, we've got manga, we've got karate, we've got tower. And when we're looking at actually where the gibbons sing from, again, this is something important in terms of understanding habitat use. 80 to 95% of the singing trees were within 50% of that core central area of the main home range. We were also looking at the movement of gibbons after they completed their morning duet. And it tended to be that they would start at the edge of the territory and move further inside. You can't see my finger, sorry, move inside. So back in towards that core area. Again, this gives us a really good indication of how gibbons are using their territory and home range in order to be able to use the habitat. Understanding the behavior, when do they start singing? When is the latest that they sing in general? When does the female start the great call and the duet really starts in earnest? All of these are important things, again, when we are collecting data on gibbon singing behavior and using that, again, to interpret density and population numbers. So again, obviously, this is based in Sabangau, which is just south of the equator. It's going to be certainly different for the Skywalker gibbon, but just as an indication, all of these data are important in terms of understanding when singing takes place, when it starts. We've got roughly a start time in Sabangau of about 4:30 to 5 o'clock in the morning. When we look at the onset of the first great call, it can actually be up to an hour after the singing bout starts. Quite often, the males can sing for quite a wee while before the females join in. We have one particular female called Chocolate who is quite slow to start duetting with her adult male Captain Calloway. She can take quite a long time to wake up in the morning. We also know, of course, and this is particularly relevant when it comes to doing surveys, that gibbon singing is affected by climate, especially rain, high winds, temperature not so much really, and cloud cover doesn't appear to actually impact their singing at all. But certainly if there has been heavy rain, the gibbons are unlikely to sing, and this does impact our survey design when we are going out to collect data on gibbons in order to then find out their density. We also know, and this is unfortunately something particularly prevalent in Borneo, is that every year, every couple of years, we have significant fire events where the forest burns, the peat burns. And what we, of course, we know is that then we have huge amounts of toxic smoke being produced into the atmosphere. This seriously affects health of everything, humans and wildlife. And what we know is, again, the singing behavior of the gibbons is heavily affected by the smoke. When there is smoke, the mean number of great calls produced by the group reduces, is significantly less. They sing for less time, and it does have a knock-on effect on their social behavior. So, we do believe, we understand the gibbon duet song is a defensive function, and this is borne out by the locations of where the singing trees are within the territory. It's also an offensive function, or the idea of it being both is not necessarily borne out, because the gibbons move back into their territory after they've finished singing, rather than remaining on the outside of the territory, which you might expect if singing was more of an offensive function to tell other groups where the core group is. The fast rate of degradation, and I suppose the variable nature in some of the phrases as how they travel through the forest, does make it unlikely that some of these elements are important for intergroup communication, as has been previously suggested. So there's certain elements of the song that don't travel beyond the core territory. So some of them probably are useful for within group communication, and certain elements travel beyond the territory, and so will be important in communicating to other gibbon groups. So what we think as we learn more about these songs is that, as I said, this role that this dual role that they have to communicate within members of the family, as well as communicating to other groups. So, very brief overview about some of the background of what we know about gibbon song. So how do we actually go about estimating density? We can't go out and count every individual. That's just not feasible. And they don't make nests the way that some of their large ape cousins do, that makes it nice and easy to go and count individual nests. So a method that was actually developed in the 80s in Thailand is still pretty much the same method that we use today. It's triangulation. The actual method of collecting the data in the forest really hasn't changed. What we have updated over the last 30, 40 years is the analysis. We've got much better analysis techniques using much more focused statistics. And I'm not going to cover that in too much detail at the moment. We're going to focus on how you get the data in the field. So we're looking to try and understand population density. And when we're talking about gibbons, that's groups per square kilometre, which then allows us to extrapolate and create, hopefully, a population number. And ways you can potentially do this that have been tried with gibbons and all sorts of things is, again, estimating that it's the number of individuals within a sample area. So you have to know your samples area as well to be able to understand how many individuals are within that. You can map the range of all individuals, not really practical for Gibbons. You can do repeat line transects where you walk a single or several transects and count the animals you encounter. Again, not great for Gibbons, highly arboreal, shy, difficult to see. Or you can map locations from vocalizations or triangulation. So what is hopefully going to happen is I'm going to play a YouTube video. I suspect something will not work. So if this video does not play, please somebody shout at me. No.
Oke, mungkin saya
Can you see the video?
perlu jelaskan untuk kalian bagaimana.
We can hear it, but we can't see it.
I've done something silly with my screen. Hang on.
Okay.
Can you see some Gibbons?
Yes.
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 All right. So I will share the link with everybody afterwards. I'm not going to play the whole video because at the end it discusses in more detail how to do some of the mapping that is an important component of this. I will leave that to people to watch later. Please bear in mind the video is in Bahasa Indonesia because we made it for our Indonesian team, but there are subtitles in English. So I know this is not ideal, but as I said, this link is to a video on YouTube, which I'm happy to share. It's freely accessible, so people can watch it later to recap things. So I'm just going to go through some of the details, or at least watch the video. The idea behind the video, and I know some of you may already know this, but the idea behind it is to show to field teams who perhaps have no experience of collecting these data, so we can really clearly ensure that data are being collected accurately and everybody knows what to do. So I'm going to mute myself and play the video.
Mendengarkan suara Gibbon atau metode triangulation untuk mengetahui di mana grup owa-owa berada dan memastikan itu grup yang sama, ya. Terlebih dahulu kita mendengarkan suara owa-owa dan ini disebut metode triangulation. Dan dengan metode ini kita bisa tahu dan memastikan itu grup yang sama. Metode ini kita lakukan berulang kali 4 hari berturut-turut. Dan metode triangulation kita bisa membuat peta suara grup owa-owa, mungkin grup 1, grup 2, menggunakan kompas dan memperkirakan berapa jauh jarak Gibbon atau owa-owa dengan peneliti. Dengan peta ini kita bisa tahu di mana lokasi owa-owa tinggal.
Kami ada pertanyaan. Untuk mendengarkan suara owa-owa dan menentukan posisi di tempat owa berada, itu kita perlukan mungkin berapa tim supaya lebih bagus, ya, untuk mendengarkan.
Oke. Kita pergi untuk mendengarkan suara, itu ada 3 tim, masing-masing 1 tim itu ada 2 orang untuk 1 tim.
ini lokasi tempat atau pos untuk mendengarkan suara oa-oa di pagi. Di lokasi ini ada 3 tim. Tim 1, tim 2, dan tim 3.
Mungkin kami perlu penjelasan lagi ya. Untuk jarak tim 1 dan tim yang lainnya itu berapa jarak?
Oke. Untuk jarak pos 1 tim atau pos 2 itu jaraknya 300 meter.
Kalau Gibbon bersuara, mungkin semua tim bisa mendengar dan bisa memperkirakan berapa jarak oa-oa berada dengan mereka, dan bisa ambil kompas untuk arah dari mana asal suara oa-oa berada.
Apa kalian sudah jelas atau mau bertanya? Silakan.
Mungkin kami ada pertanyaan ya.
Ya.
Jam berapa kita yang baik untuk mendengarkan oa-oa?
Ya. Kita berangkat atau pergi ke dalam hutan di pagi hari. Itu harus sampai di lokasi jam 4.30. Dan harus menunggu suara sampai selesai, mungkin jam 10. Atau sampai tidak ada suara lagi.
Kami ada pertanyaan lagi ya. Bagaimana kalau di pagi hari waktu kita berangkat itu ada hujan? Karena sewaktu-waktu mungkin karena cuaca buruk ya, pasti itu ada hujan. Bagaimana?
Oke. Kalau ada hujan mungkin jam 4, kita harus tunggu. Tidak harus masuk hutan dan kita harus tunggu sampai hujan berhenti sebelum pergi ke lokasi mendengar suara.
Ya, ini ada satu pertanyaan untuk mendengar suara Gibbon, dan waktu kita sudah ada di dalam hutan dan ada banyak hujan.
Oke. Kalau kita sudah di dalam hutan dan sudah di lokasi, kalau ada hujan banyak sekali, mungkin lebih deras hujannya atau lebat, kita bisa kembali ke camp dan panggil semua tim dengan menggunakan radio.
Mengapa kita harus pulang kalau ada hujan?
Oke. Di sini untuk kebiasaan Gibbon ya. Biasanya kalau ada banyak hujan atau banyak asap juga kadang-kadang itu Gibbon tidak bersuara. Mungkin ada pertanyaan lagi?
Kami kira cukup ya untuk penjelasan.
Oke. Kalau kalian sudah mengerti bagaimana cara-cara untuk mendengarkan suara Gibbon, mungkin cukup sampai di sini dan kita bisa pergi besok pagi. Sampai jumpa. Terima kasih besok pagi.
Iya,
Let's go.
Ini perlengkapan untuk pergi mendengarkan oa-oa bersuara di pagi hari. Tas untuk bawa semua barang-barang dan alat yang diperlukan untuk pergi mendengarkan oa-oa bersuara.
Pensil dan kertas gunanya untuk mencatat dan menulis data yang kita perlukan.
Jam untuk mengetahui kapan oa-oa bersuara dan kapan oa-oa berhenti bersuara.
Kompas digunakan untuk mengetahui dari mana arah suara oa-oa, mungkin dari timur, barat, utara, atau selatan. Dengan kompas kita bisa mengetahui arahnya.
Senter dipergunakan untuk berjalan di dalam hutan untuk menerangi jalan.
Anti nyamuk digunakan untuk mencegah dari gigitan nyamuk karena kadang-kadang di dalam hutan banyak nyamuk.
Rantang untuk tempat nasi dan juga ada biskuit. Botol tempat untuk air minum. Sepatu boot untuk melindungi kaki dari duri dan gigitan binatang yang berbahaya. Dan jas hujan dipergunakan kalau sewaktu-waktu ada hujan. Let's go.
Pagi ini kami mau berangkat ke dalam hutan untuk mendengarkan suara owa-owa. Dan sebelum pergi kami ambil makanan dulu untuk di bawah. Sebelum kita pergi ke dalam hutan, mungkin kita harus cocokkan jam kita dulu. Ya. Sekarang jam di tangan saya jam 3.54. Ya. Nah, sekarang kalau sudah siap semuanya kita bisa pergi. Oke. Oke, sekarang kita sudah sampai di pos 1. Mungkin kami berhenti di sini, tunggu di sini. Oke, dan kalian bisa pergi ke pos 2.
Ya, oke. Sampai nanti ya.
Sampai nanti.
Oke.
Cuaca awan 35%. Hujan tidak ada. Angin 1% saja. Nah, mungkin nanti kita catat lagi setelah 30 menit untuk cuaca. Oke. Saya menggunakan anti nyamuk karena banyak sekali nyamuk. Apa kamu mendengar ada suara owa? Ya, saya mendengar juga. Mungkin dari arah sana. Saya sambil kompas dulu. Sekarang saya mau ambil kompas untuk tahu arah di mana Gibbon. Untuk kompas 250. Oke. Jarak kira-kira 800.
Ini adalah datasheet untuk pengisian suara wawa ya. Setiap 3 menit kita mengisi data suara wawa. Seperti ini ya. Ini adalah kompas, derajat kompas ya. Dan ini adalah jarak peneliti dengan wak-wak.
Ada berapa grup suara sih, Mas?
Sekarang ada 5 grup ya untuk suara.
Mungkin kita kembali ke camp saja. Karena sudah 30 menit tidak ada suara lagi. Oke.
Memasukkan data adalah satu hal yang paling penting. Kalau Anda...
Okay, so back to, hopefully you can all see the PowerPoint again. The video, I know the quality is not great. We did make it back in 2008, but the principles remain the same in terms of how you collect the data to get those accurate compass bearings and distance to the Gibbons. Now, what we will do later is think about how you actually create or find your listening posts. We have the advantage in Sabangau in Indonesia that the area is completely flat. It's a peat swamp forest. So we don't have to deal with things like mountains and hills. That's obviously something that will be relevant when surveying Skywalker Gibbon.
If I could just, one moment, Dr. Cheyne, if you could speak a slight bit slower, it would help with Dr. Amphanto's interpretation.
My bad, sorry.
Thanks so much.
So with the triangulation of the Bornean gibbons, what we do know with most gibbon species, predominantly socially monogamous and live in family groups. We also know that they are territorial and highly arboreal. We know as well that the singing has several components, male component and male song and female song. We also know that the song can travel over a wide distance, at least up to 1 kilometer, probably farther in areas with mountains. And the duet itself, which indicates that we have a paired family group, is a complex and stereotyped vocal interaction. So a complicated way of saying that it's a duet between two mated individuals in a family unit. Again, using the gibbon that I have studied for a very long time as the example. And this applies to Skywalker as well, as we know there has been dramatic decline in numbers. What we don't know is how much those numbers have declined. As I mentioned, primarily due to habitat destruction and fragmentation of the habitat. So what we've got for the Sabangao area, as I said, it's a very large area. It's very important for the Hylobates albibarbus species. And we use density estimate and population mapping in order to look at trends over time. And this ultimately will lead to, we hope, long-term conservation efforts, positive conservation. So with triangulation, the idea is to identify individual group locations in a fixed survey area. And this allows us to get an indication of the number of groups and the approximate size of the home range. So as we saw in the video, triangulation, we create a triangle of observers, humans. Roughly in the example shown below, of course, there are many other options to create a survey design. The time that we start will, of course, be determined by the behavior of the gibbons, but it's roughly 4:30 in the morning, so it is an early start. And again, as we saw in the video, what is recommended as part of the survey design is if you have not heard any gibbons calling for about 30 minutes, you can assume that the singing has stopped for the day and you can return to base. So you will record each new call, the start time, the end time, and the bearing and distance every 3 minutes. The reason for doing it every 3 minutes is that gibbons, when they are singing, do not always stay in the same place. They can move around the edge of their home range and change position, singing position throughout the same morning. So we need to work out where they are. And of course, that will change in relation perhaps to other gibbon groups. The reason that we take the weather data, again, every 30 minutes, is to just determine whether or not anything has changed throughout the survey time that might impact gibbon singing. For example, if you start in the morning and there is no rain, but the rain starts halfway through, for example, at 5:30, that will stop some gibbon groups singing and will impact the data that you have collected. It may then mean that you have to add an extra day onto your surveys. As we said, ideally you have 4 days of survey consecutive, one after the other. But if one of those days has heavy rain, you may need to add an additional day to make sure that you can collect the data from all the groups in that survey area. This, of course, can have a knock-on effect on things like logistics, especially if you are in a very remote area, if you have to change your plan because of rain. So it's always worth bearing in mind before you go to a remote area to consider how much food you can take with you, how many days you have available to collect the data, to allow yourself a backup plan in case of rain. In terms of collecting the data, the distance to the gibbon group is very useful, but it's not actually absolutely necessary when it comes to the new statistical analysis methods we have. What is absolutely critical is getting the compass bearing accurate from you as the human observers to the different gibbon groups you can hear. Because this then can be compared between the 3 teams of humans to pinpoint where the gibbons are. So you need to align the red needle with north on your compass, and you can then use that to assess the bearing from you to the Gibbons. As an indication of distance, and this will of course vary with the terrain. If it's very mountainous, the distances will be different. Roughly, if the Gibbons are between 0 to 400 meters from you, the human, the great call could be heard quite clearly, but the clarity will decrease with distance. As you get farther away, it will become more, as the Gibbons get farther away, it will become more and more difficult to hear different parts of the song. So as I said, as we have improved our analysis methods, we are coming to understand that the distance is not something that is super important. I think it's still important that we try to collect these data as an indication of distance, but the analysis can manage without accurate distance data. What is critical and super important is the compass bearing from you as a fixed point observer to the Gibbons. Again, just important to reconfirm, Gibbon singing can be affected by lots of different things, but I've already mentioned weather and of course human disturbance. What we also know is that when Gibbons are at quite a low density anyway, they don't maybe call every single day. As an example, we know this from the Hainan Gibbon on the island of Hainan off the southern coast of China. They are at very, very low density. So they do not call every single day, which means that you could potentially go and survey Hainan Gibbon and spend 4 days in the forest and not actually hear them calling. So something to bear in mind, especially when surveying new areas where you do not necessarily know the density of Gibbons there. You may not hear them every single day. Again, that might be a time when we have to consider extending our survey time beyond 4 days. So to have a look at the how the data look, I suppose. Here we've got our 3 teams of humans, and then we've got different Gibbon groups. Same group will be heard by different teams, hopefully. Of course, the compass bearing from different teams to the same Gibbon group will be different because of the position in the forest. But that's the purpose of triangulation, is to use those compass bearings and the time that the data are collected to match different data from different locations, team locations, to the same Gibbon group. So an example of the data sheet. Again, we collect the data every 3 minutes, as you can see on the left-hand side. And for each group that you hear, we then write down the compass bearing and the estimated distance in meters. As with any good data collection, of course, you must write down the date, who is collecting the data, where you are, the location, the name of your listening post, so that when it comes to the analysis, all the data sheets are clear. We also have a simple data sheet for collecting weather data, and categories that we look at are cloud cover, sun, rain, wind, and of course, a note column just in case something else happens that might impact the Gibbons that we need to know about. This could include, for example, if you encounter hunters, if, for example, you hear the sound of chainsaws. All of these things are important to note down when collecting data and may impact the Gibbons singing. Oops. We're not expecting, when taking weather data, that you necessarily have a weather station with you. It's simple categories of data that allow you to understand whether or not anything that's happening in the weather might impact the Gibbons singing. Again, as was said in the video, since you're going to have 3 separate teams collecting data that is time sensitive, you have to make sure that everybody's watch is the same. So synchronize watches before you go into the field. You want to make sure you have the most accurate start time for the Gibbons, which does mean when you are waiting at the listening post, sit quietly, keep talking to a minimum so you can make sure you're hearing for that first call. Absolutely critical that you do not try to imitate the Gibbon call to try to start them singing. That's just not, it's not going to help with the data collection. And we don't honestly know the implications of kind of singing at the Gibbons, so it's just bad practice. And yeah, if it is raining when you are supposed to go out, there isn't really much point in going out when it is raining. The Gibbons will not sing and you will sit and get cold and wet. So wait until the rain stops. You can then go into the forest and set up your listening posts. If the rain, of course, continues for the whole day, you will have to add another day into your survey plan. So a lot of this, it comes down to being able to accurately pinpoint where the Gibbons are. Now, the main reason that we have 2 people at each of the 3 listening posts is, well, 1 is safety, but 2 is that you can compare where you think the Gibbons are coming from with your partner and make sure you have the most accurate compass bearing and hopefully distance as well. But it does mean you have to listen. One of the benefits of this is, of course, you can actually cover quite a large area and get a good estimation of density and therefore hopefully create a population estimate for that area. I will cover slightly, a little bit, sorry, the current analysis technique we are using. It's called acoustic spatial capture recapture. Now it's based on spatially explicit capture recapture, which is a method being used to analyze camera trap data. The principle is similar. Camera traps are a fixed location and animals come past them. When we are doing triangulation, humans are the fixed point and we're listening to the animals singing. All of this software and explanatory video and manual is freely available on the SSA website. It's based on the statistical package R, but you do not need to understand R to use this. What we've done is created a user-friendly interface. So you don't need to understand R. I certainly don't. And this will allow you to do accurate analysis. It means that as far as possible, everyone doing Gibbon surveys now is using the same method of analysis and method of data collection, so we can compare numbers. Again, along with the link to the YouTube video, I will share these links with everyone so that you can access it. I'm Apologies, everything is in English. But it is hopefully very simple to use. Clear explanation of how to prepare the data, and then you just upload the files and it does everything for you. After you have uploaded your files, the program will show you a summary of your data, just so you can check everything is accurate. It will create a map of your listening posts, again, so you can check everything is accurate. It then will create a population density estimate for you. Nice and simple, much easier than the old method we had of complicated Excel spreadsheets. This is chocolate, one of my favorite Gibbons. So just to do a little bit more about some of the advantages of looking at Gibbon triangulation. Understanding population distribution. We've got 4 species on the island of Borneo. And this is just an indication, again, is the idea of having 3 human listening posts is that there will be some overlap in your effective listening area, which is the survey area within which you are estimating the number of Gibbons. So as an example of some of the information that we can get from this is, as I said, we tend to do it in groups per square kilometer. So this is just an example of some data from Borneo from the different species. What we're normally seeing is maybe 2.5 to 3 groups per square kilometer across Borneo. That's our average. What we have noticed, though, in one of our survey sites called Bawan on the left here, is we had about 7 groups per square kilometer. That's a very high density. At first glance, this seems to be really good news. However, when we actually went and surveyed the forest, what we've seen is that the gibbons are squashed, compressed into a small area. On one side, the forest has been completely cleared, and on the other side, the forest has been burnt. So you've got lots of gibbons stuck together in a small area of forest. So that's creating an unsustainable high population density. What we also need to know with the gibbons to create a population number is not just the number of groups per square kilometer, but what is the average group size? For Hylobates albibarbus, it's 3 to 5 individuals. And we can therefore use that with the knowledge of the number of groups per square kilometer and the number of individuals in one group, and an understanding of the size of the area we want to get a population estimate for, then we can actually get a number. What we can also do with this, and this is again data from Sabangao, is over time, we can look at trends in population numbers or density. And we can use that to understand what human disturbance issues might be causing a change in the density of gibbons. And this allows us then to look at a trend. So these are just some different sites that we survey across the Sabangao landscape of 5,600 square kilometers and a site in East Kalimantan. And we can look over time and see what is happening to the population. This will help us to make conservation management decisions about how we can hopefully help the population either stay stable or increase. Any survey method like this, where you're not counting every single individual animal, always will have some sources of error. One of the sources of error that we hopefully have sorted by having the new statistical software is that people who don't necessarily have much experience can under or overestimate the distance from the human group to the gibbons. As I said, not every group will sing every day. So there is a survey flaw, the error in there. Gibbons may change position as they sing in the same day, but that's why we take data every 3 minutes. And another source of error is collecting data on gibbons that are not in a mated pair, which may sing, but they're not making a duet. And this can potentially cause an overestimation of the numbers. We've got much better at using statistical software like the acoustic spatial capture recapture program in R, which takes into account many of these errors. But if we don't know information about group demographics, how many gibbons are in a family group for a particular species, it can make the calculation of the overall population more difficult. Some people have asked, why don't we just walk along transects or paths and count gibbons? It has been done in the past. It is not the recommended method, though. It can be very time-consuming, takes a lot of people power, and if the gibbons are not habituated or are quite at low density, it makes it much more difficult to encounter the gibbons and then collect a population density estimate. It can be done, and if it is done, then the analysis that we do is using the program distance to collect, to do the survey analysis. So I'm probably going to stop there rather than go into further information about implications for communication between groups. I'll make sure that I have all of the links to the YouTube video and all of the analysis software and make sure that that is shared. So with that, apologies if I was speaking too quickly. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.